Welcome to All Things Power, the electrifying podcast by Cummins Arabia, where we explore sustainable power generation technologies, climate change, zero emissions, and more.
Welcome to another episode of the Cummins Arabia podcast series. Today we are going to explore more about data centers, what are the challenges, drivers, and what to expect in the future. And to talk about this topic, we have a very, very special guest today. I would like to welcome Sanjay Sainani, Senior Vice President and Global CTO of Huawei Digital Power. Sanjay, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Amit. Pleasure being here.
So Sanjay, it will be great if you can just give us a little bit overview of what you do currently at Huawei and what are your short-term priorities and long-term goals.
So I basically have two roles at Huawei. I'm the Global Head of Business Development for data centers, which basically means I'm somewhere in the world working with different customers and trying to understand their requirements and making sure Huawei can offer them the right solutions. And my other role is as a global CTO. I'm the bridge between markets and innovation. I work very closely with our innovation and R&D teams in terms of future technologies and roadmaps that would help Huawei to stay on top of the game.
Wow. Very interesting, Sanjay. So, I mean, having been in this now industry for a long time, what do you see? What has happened? How can you describe to us and to the users a bit of the journey the data center industry has gone through over the last few years?
Sure. So they were all called computer rooms not many years ago. And clearly, as more businesses went digital, the relevance of IT and therefore the computer rooms became dominant. In the last decade, we have seen the movement in terms of the size, the scale of these computer rooms, mainly driven by the volume of digital play that happens within the business. And we've also then seen technologies like cloud computing drive a new business model where the services are now being offered from a centralized point.
Right.
Instead of everyone having their own IT under the table or in a closet in their building, you basically are now consuming IT as a service.
Right.
Something similar would be 100 years ago, you probably had every house, every business would have a diesel generator supplying power.
Mm-hmm.
Today, you buy power from the utility.
Absolutely.
And you use probably a generator only as a backup.
Right.
And that's happening in the space of IT. And that is one of the key drivers today.
Right.
In some ways, the COVID phase that the whole world saw also kind of moved some of the fence sitters to move in the direction of digitization rather. Everyone is now very clear that if you are not on a digital platform, you could basically get shuttered.
Right.
Not to mention the efficiencies, the customer experiences, the scalability, the flexibility, the 24/7 of the game. If you then add to that technology such as mobile solutions, mobility,
okay,
that has taken the need for digital data to the next level. We consume data now pretty much every minute of the day that we are awake. We fiddle with our phones, we take pictures, we can read data, we want to check on what's going on. So everything is being fed to the consumer now through the networks. All of that translates into data centers somewhere, be it at the back end, the large data centers, or as we call them, cloud data centers now, or right at the front end, which are the edge data centers, which obviously help to improve user experience. So one is that whole digitization play that has driven the demand for data centers. Second is the cloud as a technology has driven the demand for data centers. And then we are also seeing elements as in government legislation. You could procure services from wherever. However, with data sovereignty requirements, the expectation is now that the physical location of the data sources and the data storage should be, and data processing should be within the geographical confines of that country. So that is further, creating the demand of data centers, which is reasonably well spread. So now every country you will see will have some form of data centers.
So yeah, in the past we saw that data centers were put in certain geographies where there were conducive environments or things like that. But now we see that irrespective of whether in the hot Middle East or desert environment, we see a good demand growing up.
Absolutely.
Is it because of this regulatory driver?
Absolutely. Having said that, you would still have certain applications or certain activities that are being done, have to be done, which may not be necessarily governed or restricted to data sovereignty. So, for example, if I'm in the business of generative AI, I'm using GPT, which is the big buzzword now, which basically is generative pre-programmable transformers. These are algorithmic plays that help you to create predictive models using hundreds of millions of parameters. You model them to be to come up with a final result which is far more predictable. ChatGPT is just one version of this, which is more a conversational bot using this technology. Now, if you go back and see as to how this is being, put together, GPT roughly just for language learning, large volume language learning, or LLM as it is called, large language models, would require somewhere between 4,000 to 5,000 petaflops a day, just per session. That obviously just gets you to a stage where you now need to fine-tune it, sensitize it. That would probably require another half of that petaflops to sensitize it. So now you have about 6,000 petaflops. That is just now the model. You now need to apply it, which means the inferencing part of it. Different applications will try and use it. That could go into thousands of petaflops. So in that context, the sheer volume of data that needs to be processed is massive. If you think of how much time it would take for a learning model to, churn through these parameters, you could go into 60, 90 days. You don't have time for that because it would take you 90 days to then figure out, is it really working or not? So you try and do it probably in 15, 20, 25 days, which is reasonably fast. But that requires, again, huge volumes of data.
Right.
Huge volumes of processing, not to mention cost.
Sure.
A 10,000, 20,000 GPU farm would be required to do something like this. NVIDIA server probably cost to the tune of about 200 kilo US.
Wow. Okay.
So to set up even something like this requires at least $500 million to $1 billion.
Right. Right.
That's not in the play of normal enterprises. So you're again seeing either government research labs or hyperscalers or large OTT players who are playing in this space today.
Right. Right. So I think this is. I mean, you gave us a good overview of what's happening globally in terms of the trends. If we come closer to the region in terms of the Middle East, what do you see is happening in the region here locally? And what are the challenges and opportunities, particularly if somebody operating in the data center segment, what do they see today in terms of challenges, and with challenges do also come opportunities. So what opportunities are there in the data center industry today?
So I guess you and I first met probably in 2015, 2016, and at that point in time, the total footprint of data centers in the GCC was probably 30, 40, 50 megawatt tops. Could add up almost everything. As of last year, it's about 350 megawatts. So we've seen 10x in 6-7 years. So not bad. Depends on who you talk to. The expectation is with this 350 will become 700 in the next 3 years. So you're looking at a 2x growth at 350 megawatt in 2.5, 3 years. So I don't think there's a dearth of opportunity here, right? What is driving that? Obviously, Middle East more specifically, the governments are very keen in ensuring digitization across all aspects of government and businesses. And this has pretty much been the theme across many markets, but more so here. You also see the new positive changes that are happening in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And so that is, obviously are one of the, big drivers here. Also, in the last decade, more so in the last 3 to 5 years, most GCC countries, you look at the World Cup that was hosted in Qatar, if you look at what Saudi is doing, Ronaldo playing in Saudi Arabia is just one small reflection of how the countries are looking at themselves and the future. So there's some serious growth being planned, serious investments being planned. And all of that is being planned in a manner which is sustainable. So they are all looking at new ways to ensure sustainability, carbon footprint, use of green energy, use of digital technologies. So in some ways, Middle East is way ahead of the game in terms of at least their aspiration, towards a greener, more sustainable future.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. Today, when I go to Saudi, and the number of apps that you can download on your mobile to interface with any government activities is just at the click of a button. And
Absolutely.
in the past, you had to go and knock the doors of the government offices or stand in those long queues. Nothing anymore. I can just renew the visa of my employee within a few minutes just by going to their portal. So the digitization that has happened, especially in the UAE and Saudi, is phenomenal.
Absolutely. And, this trend will only continue because what we are seeing are some basic services, getting approvals, getting permissions, renewing a passport, getting a visa. These are some of the basic elements. The governments are also looking at trying to understand better the drivers in terms of, cash flows in the financial industry so that they can work on a more safe banking, more safe utilization of cashless payments, right? Because every time you open up technology, there's a chance for fraud, malpractices. And so not only these technologies and platforms are being used to offer services, but there is a lot of work happening behind the scenes to make these services more safe, more secure, and not just limited to data sovereignty.
Right. And another factor I see is the security, overall security approach of the governments. Today, almost any road you travel by, you see a security camera that is live recording on what's happening there. So I'm assuming all of this also goes and sits somewhere on a data center.
Absolutely. I mean, a safe city requires surveillance. I mean, you can't be safe without surveillance, and this is where cameras, sensors are part of that. And clearly, the higher quality cameras of 4K, 8K, definition generate huge amount of data. There are, of course, techniques. You don't necessarily have to transport all that data at the back end. And this is where there's a lot of edge activity that is happening. This is a so-called edge data center, if you may, because you would have probably a few dozen cameras working closely, at an edge, which the edge processes then how much data needs to be, sent back for storage, if at all. And so there are a lot of these applications, surveillance being one of them, immersive experiences, as in, gaming experiences, holographic video conferencing experiences. All of this would require, some form of edge processing. What we haven't discussed so far is the industrial IoT, right? I mean, think about it. in terms of, the example usually talked about is every aircraft has tens of thousands of sensors, generates huge amount of data, and that data is being constantly stored, analyzed, processed to understand what's happening for safety, for efficiency. That's just aircraft. Think of all the devices out there, from transportation devices to industrial devices to even consumer devices. So we are looking at data generation is going to be at a scale which has never been even, thought of.
Right, right.
The challenge, of course, will be what data is really useful. You also don't want to, generate data and transport data just because you have data.
Right.
And so this is where the industry will play. How do you monetize the data? How do you leverage the data? But all of that, irrespective, will require data centers.
Absolutely.
That's where we are.
Right. So Sanjay, I want to bring you back to the challenges that exist today. So, you talked about the demand, there is data that is getting generated. So there needs to be a lot of data centers here. But are there any challenges, when, let's say tomorrow, a new player wants to come and set up a data center in this region? What process they go through? Do you see some challenges in that setting up of data centers here?
Sure. So I guess, last quarter, I was attending a conference and heard quite a few numbers. And one number was globally, the footprint of data centers as of early this year is about 30 gigawatts. And the expectation is by 2030, we are going to double that.
Wow.
So that's some serious data center growth. So the first challenge that comes out, and of course, this could be different for different countries depending upon, your local environment and where you are today. But the first challenge that would come to mind would be availability of power.
Absolutely.
You have that kind of power available. Today, data centers are not half a megawatt, 2 megawatt. Today, each building is 8 to 12 megawatt, 20 megawatt per building. And you don't have any more buildings. You're looking at campuses. I've just come back from Asia. I'm discussing with customers where campus sizes are 400 megawatt, 500 megawatt campus. 500 megawatt IT load. Okay. You do all the math, you're looking at 3/4 of a gigawatt worth of energy required. That's city scale.
Right.
Power.
It is huge.
You need to first make sure you have power available.
Right.
That's number one. There's a challenge of carbon footprint. Everyone has signed up to carbon reductions goals. So not only you need this huge amount of power, you need to green everything that you have, which means the next phase of power procurement will have to be green power. Relatively, you can deploy green power deploying green power is relatively easy. The challenge is the existing grids don't have the capacity to transport this grid power.
Sure.
Even if you had a lot of these renewable powers, these are intermittent powers, right? Solar energy during the day,
right?
Wind energy, depends on the sun gods or the wind gods. So the challenge here is how do you ensure lower grid impedances? So again, you need some form of technology to manage the grid impedances. So so one challenge is at a grid level.
Okay.
The second challenge is with this kind of demand, it's very obvious demand supply chain, right? Currently you are in the business of providing, generators, and your timelines of 6 to 9 months is reflective of the concern and the challenge. The third one is getting people. There aren't enough experienced people out there who you could tap. And to be fair, this business is about availability. At the end of the day, all of this billions of dollars of investment is to create availability of the platform. Availability is not only the investment in high performance equipment, but there's also the ability to ensure they are on and up all the time. And so that requires the right SLAs in terms of response time, experts, and so on. And so it's a challenge that you have to work through.
Sanjay, I want to take you back to the size of data centers that you mentioned. So for some of our users who are from the backup power industry that Cummins is from, what does it translate into? So, when you look at 100 megawatt, when you say IT load, what type of power backup does the system require?
There you go. You're a businessman at the end. No, clearly. So if you look at, let's do some simple math. If you look at, and let's use GCC as a good example to do some number back of the envelope. So if you look at 100 megawatt of IT load, and your average PUE is around 1.5, 1.55, given the thermal environment here, your peak PUE could easily be 2. Right? Because that's the kind of, at 49 degrees centigrade or 52 degree, you would need to size everything for that. So that means your 200 megawatt is the incoming power that you should design for, right? Now, that is assuming it is no redundancies. So once you then start add redundancies, you typically would have, thumb rule, 33% more. So you're looking at about 266 megawatt of power out there for 100 megawatt worth of IT load from a diesel point of view. And that's the kind of conversion you're looking at or demand you're looking at for your part of the equipment.
Interesting. And you talked about the intermittency of the renewable sources. So I just wanted to touch upon that. What do you think, or what technologies can play a role in addressing that challenge?
Yeah. So a good grid basically means a grid with low impedance, which basically is what we studied in school, right? So anytime you throw open a switch, you would be able to move power very quickly in. If there's a fault, you should be able to clear the fault very quickly. You should be able to regulate the voltage frequencies very smartly, which means a low impedance grid. As you keep adding, so today we are living in a world where most of enterprises can become prosumers, which is you can not only consume energy, you can even produce energy. And the minute you produce energy, and if that energy is being fed into the grid, the impedance of the grid now changes. Because you may say, I have so much power getting generated. Yes, but that power or that system is not a low impedance system. And so as you keep adding more power to the grid with newer forms of power, your grid impedance goes up, which basically makes your grid less reliable. So now you have voltage regulation issues, frequency regulation issues, your ability to clear faults changes. So you need to stabilize the grid. And one form of stabilizing the grid is adding very low latency power sources, which today are batteries. So you are seeing a lot of grid scale battery energy storage system being attached to the grid. In most cases, it's not in most cases being used to give backup power in the night. It's more for grid stabilization.
Okay.
But in some cases, it can be used to manage peak tariff curves.
Okay.
Like, for example, in Denmark, the factor between cost of energy at midnight to during the day, and believe me, I had to check this a dozen times and speak to a lot of people to make sure that my information is correct. The factor between nighttime power and daytime power is about 40 to 60x.
Wow.
So 1 cent in the night becomes 40 cents in the day. So this is an amazing example where if you're an entrepreneur, you would rather charge energy sources in the night at 1 cent and go off the grid during the 40 cent per hour or per kilowatt hour, time slots, and use your stored energy. And this is very true in areas where the supply and demand curves are different. Also, these supply-demand curve deltas are coming because of renewable energy. In Denmark, there's a lot of wind power. In Europe, there's a lot of solar energy. And so the amount of energy that you have during the day may not synchronize with the exact time slot when you want to use that energy. You may have surplus energy in the night with so much wind power. So,
well, I think, I wanted to also touch upon the aspect of when you build data centers, how does what goes into the total cost of energy of building a data center, in terms of the various let's say the IT piece of it or the other utilities piece of it. And because we have heard about data centers get built, but then the utilization is low, and then the overall cost effectiveness of a data center, the return of investment does not come through. So how does one approach the building or designing of data centers to be more efficient in terms of getting a better return of investment? You have, some thoughts on that?
So at the end of the day, data center facility is a construction business. So it's almost like, your physical infrastructure. And more challenges in most physical infrastructure build-outs is that it's not as scalable. You build an airport, you build it for, the minute you build it, it's supposed to work through 5, 7, 10 years worth of traffic growth, which means it's designed for a traffic growth of 10 years down the road, which seriously means it'll be empty in the first 3, 4 years, relatively empty. Same applies to any infrastructure business. Problem is the return on capital employed drops very quickly when you do that. And so as any CFO would tell you, can we employ only the capital that's required for the next 18 months? And that brings you to the point of, how scalable can you make it?
Right, okay.
Because you need that flexibility in your build to add on demand.
Sure.
In the shortest possible time.
Okay.
Without interrupting the existing services.
Right.
And so that comes to new techniques. At Huawei, we do a lot of prefabricated, pre-fitted modular builds. And that is one way of building out a facility that is modularized not only at a component or a system level, but is modularized at a building level. So you can drop ship a building literally in 7 to 12 months on demand and keep scaling up.
And has this also, because in the past we used to say a data center takes about 2 years, 3 years. And now I think you are really looking at a very, very compressed timeline of having right from, greenfield to having an operation ready. So what has happened? Where do we stand today in terms of those timelines?
No, absolutely. We have in the last 5 years rolled out just in the Middle East close to about 160, 170 megawatt of data centers, and as Huawei, and almost all of them have been built between 12 to 15 months. If you ask me, in fact, the longest time that is required here is to get approvals and sign-offs from different authorities. Not that they are taking any longer, but that's a phase that is part of this.
The process you have to go through.
In many parts in Europe, it may take you up to a year just to get approvals. So from a construction point of view, from an engineering point of view, we are seeing best practices of prefabricated, pre-fitted, and they may not necessarily be applied in every scenario. You may not have the luxury to apply it across the whole building, given the nature of the building that you're looking for. But we are seeing this getting applied to applied at system level. So today, for example, the most complicated part of the data center is the electrical room. And if I can prefabricate, pre-fit the whole electrical room in a factory, where not only it's assembled as an electrical room, it's even pre-tested as electrical for its performance, and then it's just shipped to site. Then your ability to integrate it with the building is a few weeks instead of a few months.
Absolutely.
And so this is the approach. We've done the same thing for cooling. We could, of course, do it for the same thing for the whole building. And then these are ways where you are trying to create predictable performance, guaranteed performance, in the shortest possible time, repeatable, scalable. So in some ways, you're kind of ticking all the boxes that are the challenges for the industry.
I mean, this is kind of an innovation that has happened over a period of time to address certain challenges with respect to reduce time to get this data center online. What other innovation do you see in the technology front? In terms of trying to bring the cost down or to improve the performance or efficiencies of a data center? If you can touch a bit upon that.
So it's all about cost, right? At the end of the day, we at Huawei, we have a term, we call it watt per bit, right? How many watts are you consuming per bit of data that you're working on? The same thing applies then to, what is the innovation you are. So the whole innovation here is to get more bits per watt. There's some play that has to be done by the IT players, the chipset players, which what they're doing. And there's some play that is part of the ecosystem, which is where we all sit in. So let me work you through some innovations. I would start from the grid side, and then we walk in towards the data center. So at a grid level, clearly all the carbon footprint requirements is pushing people to buy more green power. It's not just technical innovation in terms of, hey, I can produce green power at lower cost. I just came back from China, and in Huawei, we've our group now called Digital Power has moved to a separate head office in Shenzhen. And what was impressive is this is a complex with 3 very large, skyscrapers, 40 odd story buildings, and the building's external facade, which is the glass facade, is a solar panel.
Wow.
So we're not talking solar panels on the roof.
Okay.
The whole building is a solar,
it's a solar
panel.
power. Wow.
Right.
Wow.
And with 70% through visibility. So if you're standing inside, obviously the panel reduces visibility by 30%, but with 70% visibility. So that gives you protection from thermal gains that otherwise come during the day.
Right.
So your building is getting cooler.
Exactly. So it gives you
and you're generating power
as well.
Right? So that's the play, right?
Sure.
So we're looking at how do you produce better green power.
Okay.
The second innovation is happening, as I mentioned to you earlier, that to stabilize the grid, you need forms of energy storage.
Sure.
So battery technologies. And here we're not talking about battery technology in terms of backup time for the data center. We're talking about battery technology to help the grid stabilize. So this is grid scale energy storage, right? So that we're talking about that. Of course, there is a play here for fuel cells, right? Because at the end of the day, green power, if your fuel to the fuel cell is using green power, then you are able to ensure that renewable power is available 24/7, because you could produce the fuel during the day. And that's what a lot of countries are working on, including Saudi, India.
To produce green hydrogen and then use that.
And then obviously use that, throughout the day. So those are some of the technologies, that is working on energy storage and green power. In fact, I was talking to someone recently, R&D folks in the US, and they were telling me that company is roughly testing about 8 or 9 battery chemistries.
Wow. So different
from
technologies
different
and battery.
From lithium ion to sodium ion to aluminum air to iron air, you name it.
So lithium is no more a constraint to scale up the battery technology. You don't see that as a constraint.
I believe right now lithium is probably the most promising because it has been adopted across the industry. And obviously, the industry is not stagnant. Innovation is not stagnant. We may find the next battery which may be cheaper to make, more sustainable, has longer life, more reliability.
Right.
So the search is on, right? And it's not necessary that you have one technology for everything. You would have energy density to weight ratios, to cost ratios. And, batteries that are outdoor would be different. Batteries that are indoor would be different. Battery on an aircraft would be different. So you would have many different, in a data center is very unique, right? In a renewable energy, you're looking at storing 100 megawatt of energy, for example, and you would discharge it over 16 hours.
Right.
Right. That's the period in the night.
Absolutely.
Whereas in a data center, you have 100 megawatt energy, you want to discharge it in 10 minutes.
Right.
Because that's the window you look for until the diesels kick in,
So
right?
different applications.
And so exactly, and so there are so many different ways you would want the battery to work. So that's on the battery side. Then if you look on the power side, it's all about efficiency of the powertrain, right? So UPS efficiencies, conversion efficiencies, across the powertrain. That is where converged solutions are working, because once you converge the solution, your copper lengths of connectivity go down. Your ability to manage the solution is much better. Your overall footprints go down. And so that innovation is helping efficiencies. You can embed a lot of IoT at the factory, which is part of the system. So your ability to understand the health of your system, predict issues in the system is much better. So that's happening on the power side, right? Cooling is the area that we believe is now going to see some very interesting innovation. Till date, if you look at GPC, general purpose compute, has moved from probably 200 watts per server to about 350 watts per server. HPC, high performance compute, has moved from 250 watts per server to 900 watts per server.
Wow, huge, massive growth there.
Exactly. And so that now requires a new way to cool, right? Air may not be the most efficient way to cool it. So now you're looking at liquid cooling. Within liquid also, you may have liquid to chip, you may have, immersion cooling. So there will be different ways to cool it, right? So cooling is an area of innovation. But what's very interesting is that a 100 megawatt data center at full load generates 100 megawatt of heat, right? Because all the energy consumed is converted into heat. Right? There's no physical movement here. Everything is heat.
Sure.
So the question is, can I capture this heat and reuse it?
So waste heat recovery is also...
So that's the next big play. In air-cooled systems, the average temperatures of the thermal of the return air or the hot air is probably 35, 45. So it's what we call low-quality heat. But when you go liquid cooling, you could have return temperature at 60, 70, 80 degrees off the liquid. Now that's a very interesting temperature available. You could probably capture much more and use it into much more usable heat, right? So we are seeing a lot of innovation there in heat capture, heat recovery, both in air, in liquid. Governments are also forcing this innovation. In Germany, there's new legislation that every data center has to have a certain PUE, and every data center has to make sure that a certain percentage of heat is recovered, is captured, recovered, and sold.
Wow. Okay. So governments are coming into play there.
So data centers, I believe, going in the future would start becoming either other energy consumers, heat consumers will move towards the data center, or data centers will move towards areas where heat can be reused more effectively. So the innovation is not only at a technology level, it's also going to happen at a legislation level as to how we plan data centers. When you need so much power, you cannot just anymore pick a site which is cheap. You also need to make sure power can be delivered there. So the energy grid has to be designed for these new gigawatt scale infrastructures. So there's a lot of innovation, I believe, that will be required, if we are going to go from 30 gigawatt today to 60 gigawatt by 2030.
So yeah, I think the growth that you are mentioning, Sanjay, even if half of it is true, there's a massive opportunity for everybody in this ecosystem to go and get more business. So, just coming towards the end, Sanjay, what is that we have not yet seen and is yet to come? So what to expect in the future from the industry stand?
Never say never, right? I guess, for me, the ideal world would be, or ideal space in the data center would be that even if it is air-cooled, if we just say, for example, increase the average operating point in the data center in thermal operating point. So right now it's Asher 25 plus minus 2. Some of the players are testing it at 28 plus minus 2, 30 plus minus 2. But let's say most of the IT equipment we know for a fact can work at much higher temperatures. So if we can set that up at 35, 36 degrees, for example, operating temperatures, then suddenly in half of the world, you won't need cooling.
Right. That can make a big
so
game
that
changer.
can make it's a big game changer. For high density, definitely you need to transport the heat out, right? So you would still need to extract the heat out, but you won't need the kind of cooling that we're using today, right? So that is something that is worth looking at in my opinion. Second is you have availability zones, right? The end goal is availability of an IT service, right? That's the end goal.
Yes.
And you have availability zones, right? So when you have availability zones, how important it is to create infrastructure redundancies at electrical mechanical level. Can software can availability done through smart software systems which can move your traffic between availability zones without having to invest in a lot of physical assets, which is basically land, copper, iron, and so on. So I guess that is also another area, where we believe there will be innovation.
Right.
Finally, chipset innovation where you can do more bits with less watts.
Right.
Cooler IT.
Fantastic. So Sanjay, I think to sum it up, there's a huge trend towards generation of more data. We talked about different drivers that are today creating more data. Therefore, data centers are happening, and there is government regulation that is localizing a lot of data center requirements going forward. There are challenges, but there are also a lot of opportunities. We talked about the innovation in technology, and particularly for the people from my industry, and I think back in Cummins, I'm sure they're going to be excited about the opportunities that you mentioned in terms of the trends towards sustainability. Where we can have emissionized gensets supplied or fuel cells. Is you talked about. Cummins recently invested in battery energy storage as well. So I think that's something to look forward to. I think so. That's a lot of opportunities. I think the knowledge that you have to share, I cannot capture it in one session today. So I think we will have to have another follow-up session with you. But I really appreciate you taking out time to come and share this insights with us. And looking forward to have another follow-up conversation with you soon.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you, Amit.
Thank you, Sanjay.